Hey there. I hope everybody has a happy and healthy Thanksgiving tomorrow, and that you're able to spend some time with your family and friends. It's been a really weird year, but I've got a lot to be thankful for. I really do, so I hope you do too. I know I said I was going to stay away from the vintage stuff, but every once in a while something so good comes along that you just got to jump on it. So today I have a vintage Boker Camp Knife to show you, and it's really nice. I have refurbished this knife, but it's really in excellent condition. So this is Boker's Camp Knife. That's what it's referred to here in North America. It's called the Sports Knife in Europe, or Sports Messer in Germany. And Boker says they've been making this knife continuously since Heinrich Boker set up the knife business in Solingen, Germany in 1869. Although I don't know how they could have been making the knife when the factory was destroyed by Allied bombers in World War II, and it didn't appear apparently in catalogs from 1990 to 2013. But Boker says they've been making this ever since they started making knives in Solingen, and so it's one of their oldest models, and they still make it today. So the second half of this video, I'm going to do a tool-by-tool comparison of this vintage Boker Camp Knife to a modern one, and also Remington's Camp Knife, which was a very close copy of this knife. What I look for when I'm trying to find an old Boker Camp Knife, and this is my third one of these. I've had two others that I've refurbished and sold on, and the last one that I sold, I immediately regretted it, so I've been on the hunt for a nice one ever since, and I'm glad to have this one. But I look for a few clues. On the outside of the knife, one of the things I look for is this decorated bail here. If you look real carefully, you can see that there's a hand hammered or stamped pattern on this bail. It's interesting. It's a line, a dot, a line, another line, a cross, another line, and four dots hammered across right above the pin. Now, for a while, I thought maybe this indicated an individual's maker, like a maker's mark or a certain date or something, but it obviously doesn't, because it's consistent across the knife. So if you see another old vintage Boker, it's going to have this exact same pattern. I have no idea what it means. The bail is usually steel, I believe. When you get these corroded, you can tell they're not nickel silver. They look different when they're corroded. They clean up differently. So they're probably steel, or at least some other composition than the German silver here. But the newer ones, they don't have the decoration. That's one thing I look for. Also, no Solingen on the shield, so just the chestnut tree. I have read that shields with no Solingen are pre-World War II, and shields with Solingen are post-World War II. I'm not sure that's totally accurate. There is a different shield, which is older. It's larger. It does not have the lined background. It's just the tree and a much bigger shield. Does not say Solingen. That usually appears on knives that have bone or stag handles, and they are most definitely pre-World War II. I had one of those. I did a video on it before and after I fixed it up. I'll put the links to those videos up here if you'd like to go and take a look at that one. So this knife, it could be pre-World War II, but it could also be a post-World War II, late 40s, 50s. It's really kind of hard to know. But the covers on these older ones are going to be a synthetic plastic. The modern ones are Delrin. That's the base model. But these are not Delrin. At first I thought they were maybe Bakelite or Bakelite, because that was kind of an early plastic that was widely used. But then I read that this is what Boker called improved stag. So it got me wondering if it's perhaps like Landers, Frary, and Clark's perfected stag. And I got out a couple of my LF&C scout knives and started looking at the scales, and while they're a little different color, this one's more brownish, this one's more blackish, the material does seem very similar. And what LF&C did was they took ground staghorn and mixed it with an acetate binder in celluloid. So an improved celluloid, really. with ground staghorn, and it seems to be quite stable. Unlike celluloid, it doesn't crack and shrink, and these have survived. The other thing to look for on an older one, of course, is the old style can opener. I'll go through the tools on this in a minute. That doesn't necessarily mean your knife is pre-World War II, particularly with Bokers. German knife makers used this for quite a while. I don't know why, because even Victorinox switched from this type of can opener to a safety style can opener in 1946. But German knife makers seem to hang on to this for a really long time. Here's a look at the outside of the knife. Here's the corkscrew. And you can see the lovely brass liners there. There's really excellent action on this knife. The spring tension is strong on all the tools. Here's the awl. And here's one thing I want to show you on the awl that I think makes this knife special. Let's see if it'll show up in the camera. All the bluing remains in the awl. That's just as blue as it can be. So what they would do is they'd blue the inside of these awls to prevent corrosion. I don't know why they had to do that. Maybe it's because they had ground that carbon steel in there. Maybe they can't get in there and polish, the tool like they can the round part on the outside here. But they would often, different knife makers, would blue the inside of those awls. And when you can get an old one like this that still has the bluing intact, it's really quite special. And we'll just run through the tools real quick. Here's the screwdriver cap lifter. And the only thing I want to say is about that is it's so much thicker and heavier looking than the new ones, the tools on the new ones. Of course, we've looked at the old style can opener. Here's the small blade. As you can see, this one has a lovely little sheep's foot blade. And if you know these knives, you know that they never came with sheep's foot blades. They came with small clip point blades. But also, if you know vintage knives, you know the small blade is always the one people seem to abuse, and it often comes broken. So this one came to me broken, and luckily the break was in front of the nail nick here, so I had something to work with. I thought about maybe making it a little spear point, but it just seemed to lend itself best to a sheep's foot. So this knife had a little swedge that began right over the nail nick here, and I was able to continue that down to the point of the knife on both sides, as you can see here. So I got a really nice, we can look at this, but I got a nice tapered edge on that. So we have a nice point. So it came out really well, I thought. And it's easy to get open, it's fully functional. Here's the main blade. Here's the other thing I think just makes this knife exceptional. It still has the full and highly readable reversed frost etch on the blade. So here you can see Boker's other old symbol, the arrow symbol. So Heinrich Boker, when he moved to Zolligen and started the knife business, he borrowed two symbols from the family tool business in Remscheid. And one of them was the big chestnut tree, because of a chestnut tree that grew over that tool shop. And the other was their old arrow symbol. And so here you can see it. And it says tree brand, of course, with the chestnut tree in the middle. And here we have 7593. So this is often called the 182 model, because that's what it was called in Europe. You see that on a lot of blade etches. But for some reason, from the late 1940s to the mid-60s, this appeared in American catalogs as model 7593. And there was also a model 7594, which had a Phillips driver in place of the corkscrew. So this one's the 7593, but it's also the 182. You can see that that blade is full, it's in great shape. I did not sharpen it. It's not that sharp, but the edge is unadulterated there. It's not chipped or worn away. So I didn't want to take away any material by sharpening it. Just left it as is because I won't be cutting anything with this knife anyway. When you want to talk about full, watch this. Look at how that closely that point lays in there with those liners. You couldn't get a more full blade than that. Here's the tang stamp. It reads, if I get it to focus, Heinrich, H-E-I-N-R, period. So Heinrich abbreviated, Heinrich Boker & Co. There is an umlaut over the O, and generally that means your knife is after 1932. Then it says Baumwerk, Zolligen. Baumwerk being tree work, or tree works in German. And then the final line, Germany, Alemania. And Alemania is Spanish for Germany. So there you have that. There's a chart in an old Knife World magazine article that dates this tang stamp from 1932 to circa 1950. And on the back, you can see the tree symbol again. Generally, if the tree symbol is on the back of your blade, you have an older knife than one that would have the tree symbol on the front. And the small blade on this one also has the tree symbol on the back of the tang, but it does not appear on the other two top layer tools, and I have seen that in other knives.
And now, before the next show starts, let's enjoy an intermission. You'll find our snack bar chock full of good things to eat and drink. Tasty, tempting hot dogs, thirst-quenching soft drinks, fresh, crunchy popcorn, a complete assortment of delicious candy, and a full line of cigarettes. You've plenty of time, so visit the snack bar now. A tasty treat will double your enjoyment of the show.
All right, let's do a head-to-head comparison of this vintage Boker Camp Knife or sports knife to a modern one, and also a vintage Remington RS 3843. Remington's Camp Knife was a direct copy of Boker's, so it'll be interesting to compare the two. On the outside, the dimensions of the Bokers are almost identical, as you might imagine. They're both 91 millimeters long in the closed position, which is about 3 5/8 inches. The Remington is 90 millimeters. It's a little closer to 3.5 inches. The modern Boker Camp knives do have nickel silver bales, and they don't have any type of decoration on them. Both have nickel silver bolsters. Here you can see, of course, a difference in the scale covers. The modern ones, the base model is Delrin. It's jigged. It looks a lot like this. They've offered them in a lot of different woods. Currently, they offer, I think, this desert ironwood on their classic gold series, and then they also offer an oak. And then they've always offered staghorn, as far as I know, which is the top of the line, and they do a beautiful job with that. They both have 4 visible pins through the covers. You have differences in the shields, of course. No Zolligen here, Zolligen here. But they have switched to a new shield. It's simpler, does not say Zolligen again. It's got a black background. It's really pretty. So they're back to one that does not say Zolligen. As far as the thickness, it's a little hard to judge because these handles are actually thicker than the bolsters, and here they're not. Now on the Remington, a couple of differences. A nickel silver bale, it is much larger than the other two, much longer. You can see that the new Boker is wider than the vintage Boker. It also has some markings. The bolsters are lined. You have a little larger shield, and I want to show you something here. If you look carefully in Remington, you'll notice the ends are backwards. That's kind of interesting. I don't know what caused that, but that is authentic, and you want to look for that when you're looking for an authentic one. The Remington comes in bovine bone scales, and they line the bolsters, if I didn't mention that. On the tools, we'll start with the corkscrews. And between the vintage Boker and the modern Boker, this shows a point that I want to make. And that is the tools on the modern ones just seem to be downsized and lighter. Now, of course, they are stainless steel, or these are carbon steel, so this steel has different properties. But there's a difference there. You can see there's a big difference in the reach, but the vintage one also seems heavier. And then the Remington has a similar reach. It has a tighter curl, but again, it looks like a heavier wire. Pretty much the same story on the awls. You have a larger, heavier tool on the vintage Boker than the modern. And with Remington, they're more similar in size. Although to me, the Remington does look a little wider, especially here in the back. The screwdrivers are a great way to show what I'm talking about with the gauge of the steel. Again, the modern is stainless steel, the vintage is carbon steel, but look at that difference. It's a huge difference. Now this is continuously tapered. This one is not. It just starts to taper on both sides from this point forward, but still look at the difference. This has a little wider mouth too. I find it does open caps better than this one. This one's okay, but it does miss occasionally. And then here's the Remington. It's more similar in size. It also opens caps very well. Similar thickness, although it is also continuously tapered. And it's swedged, a little bit like a blade would be, which is interesting. The can openers on these knives are all very different from one another. We have looked at the old style on the vintage Boker. The modern Boker has a more modern style can opener that works better and is also safer. The Remington had a similar style and function can opener, but it was actually a two-piece can opener. You can see here where the pieces are joined. They actually had this patented. It was called a Tillman's can opener. Here you can see it says Remington, and underneath is a patent number. And they claimed that that was actually stronger than their old style can opener, which was very similar to the Boker, a one-piece. It's a little harder to compare the small blades because I'm working with a broken reprofiled blade here on the vintage Boker. But again, you can see the difference in thickness across the spine there. This blade did have a swedge. The modern Bokers do not. And the nail nicks on all the tools on the vintage Boker seem to be shorter and deeper. The Remingtons had a clip point blade as well, about the same thickness, I think. Again, a nail nick that's shallower and longer. Okay, and last up are the main blades. The vintage knife has a really nice full blade, so it'll be easy to compare. Here you can see that it's about the same size, shape, and length as the modern. Now this is the classic gold series, so what they did is they went back and got a vintage tree brand arrow etch and put it on the blade in gold. It's not exactly like this one. You can see it was certainly inspired by that one. It may be a copy of a different era's etch. But again, you can see the difference in the gauge of the steel across the spine there. And again, a deeper, shorter nail nick. And a swedged blade, just slightly swedged from about the nail nick down, whereas the modern ones are not. Maybe with the thinner steel and precise machine grinding. They don't need to do that like they had to back on these thicker hand ground vintage carbon steel blades. And then the Remington. This is kind of an unfair comparison. The Remington is the oldest knife on the table. Remington only made these camp knives from 1924 to 1933. And this one came to me heavily used, abused, and corroded. So kind of a tough comparison, but it is about the same shape and length. It's about the same thickness. But here you can see that the Remington has got a much more pronounced swedge. Starts further back on the knife than the Boker. So there's been a in-depth look, tool by tool, of a vintage Boker or sports knife to a modern Boker sports knife to a vintage Remington camp knife. I hope some of you have found that helpful, particularly if you collect Bokers or Remingtons. Thanks for watching, and have a great Thanksgiving.